since you mentioned that, MMA kind of being the thing that brings you full circle and the specific valence that gives you, I had to walk away because if you're going to bring, I was annoyed enough by what I perceive as the toxicity of the fan base. But once you start to bring not the president, but a candidate into events and parade him, octagon side, well, you've said fuck you to every fan that you may have had that has a difference of opinion. And that's just purely speaking left and right. That's beyond what we've heard outside of that about, kind of cultural conditioning kinds of things. You told me how you feel about me as a fan. And quite frankly, I don't like to feel in any of my relationships that discarded and abused. So I will find something else to do with my time.
My God, can I tell you that what you just told me is something that I have gotten through people on the street, DMs, emails, you name it. I have friends who have all had basically one version or another of the exact same thing you just said, which is, I was in this because this was cool and irreverent and different. And yeah, a little edgy. And, it's not going to be PC all the time, but it seemed different and new and exciting. And, you got a glimpse into a different life and people from all over the world. It was crazy. And then somewhere along the way, it stopped being that. And it became, I always try to explain this. Well, let me just finish the point, which is, I cannot tell you how many people have written me to tell me that they're leaving the sport. They can't take it anymore. They're done. It is unbelievable to me to have lived long enough to have seen MMA. And this is where you came in based on what you're telling me, which is there was a point in time where MMA was new and exciting, but it had a particular mission, which was, we know what we have is great, and we know what we have can be big, and we're going to prove it to you. We're going to prove skeptics wrong. We're going to prove to you we're going to bring in women, and it's going to be some of the biggest fights ever. We're going to prove we can take this internationally. We're going to prove we can do big ratings on TV. We can prove we can work for young kids, men, women, gay, straight, tall, white, black, short. We're going to price tickets at affordable level. Working class people, and of course, the expensive ones at the front can be there for them, but we're going to have real fight fans, rock-ribbed fight fans at our events. We're going to be the sport for everyone in a way that you never imagined, and if you want to be a part of this, we want you here. That was expressly the message for the vast majority of my time during the sport. But right around COVID, and in particular after that, all that changed. And they basically said, not formally, they have not, I want to be clear, they've not actually said this, but the strategy of the company has basically been, okay, we're not doing that anymore. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to be kind of like a lifestyle brand. We're going to be a brand for a certain kind of demo. And we know that what we're going to do is we're going to lose a bunch of people that we had, but we're going to make a gamble. And that gamble is, even though we're going to lose a bunch of people, we are going to keep a bunch of people who are smaller in stature or size, rather. However, they're going to be much more loyal. They're going to be here until the bitter end. That is the calculation that they are making. And I don't, just from a business standpoint, as I'm not addressing it from what it must mean to be alienated from a brand that you loved, or in my particular case, the many sleepless nights asking myself, is it even ethical what I'm doing? I don't even know, right? So there's lots of problems, but just on a business calculation, I don't know if that's a bad call. It might be the right call as a business for their interests. But what I do know is it's a different sport now with a different audience making a different claim.
That's interesting to kind of conceptualize it as a conscious choice. It's almost like what's better or worse, the conscious choice or just like stumbling in it, like disregard. I have this debate when it comes to a lot of our elected officials, like the ones that know better, like the grifters, right, are the ones that are really, right, they're really there. It is it's something that kind of, you select and you kind of grow and percolate this cauldron of like-minded people, but it's the through line is like Grievance. That's at least what I see on Capitol Hill. The through line is grievance, not any particular viewpoint on the world. Like their through line is grievance, unless you call that your viewpoint on the world, which I guess some of them would, right? Problem is in actually trying to construct something and govern. The problem is in actually trying to keep them in some sort of organizational shape in order to try and push something that would be helpful to people. That's where kind of like the problems lie. And so I see, at least in as much as I pay attention to it now still, whenever there's a big fight, I have my cheat moments. Whenever there's a big fight, I go peek over and see what all is going on. And then inevitably I'll stumble on over to X, and within about 5 to 7 tweets, I'm like, okay, all right, there, and there it is right there, and there it is. And so I'm like, okay, so you've essentially made it inaccessible.
That's right.
To people that aren't down with that. So if that is a conscious choice, that's all well and good. But I mean, you gotta hope that those people can support a whole. There's a lot of people that are making the gamble that a very specific segment of our population is going to prop up their entire brand.
That's exactly what it is. I mean, because the reality is, it's very easy to say, well, the UFC made a conscious choice to do this, which I do think they did. I'm not backtracking at all. But one of the things that I wrestle with is like how much of that was an organizational pivot in a way where like internally they fully considered it. And then rather how much of it is just that's what right-wing people do now. And the fan base in large part now, most of the fighters, the vast majority of the fighters, obviously most of the managers, most of the people in the sport all the way up to the leadership, they're just right-wing. And as change took over their priorities and their behaviors and what they wanted, that's how it just bled out into all their decision making, right? So it's a question of like how conscious it all was. I mean, it was a pivot. It's just, it's hard to say exactly what precipitated it. But to your point, it's a very insular way of looking. It's like we need, like it's us now, and we need this to make it all work. And I think right now, I mean, this is, I have lived through a time when the right was not ascendant, and now I'm living through a time when it is ascendant. I don't know what the future holds, and part of what those are is a scary look into what could happen. But the other part is that it won't be ascendant for obviously forever. And as a consequence, what happens when they're not, and everything begins to collapse in on itself, and when there's infighting, and what happens when Donald Trump is no longer the literal figurehead of this party? And again, maybe it's old age, maybe it's 10 years from now, but at some point he will not be in that place. What happens to this thing at this moment? And so it's kind of an interesting gamble. There's a bit of interesting data beyond this. I know this is MMA specific. I'll just leave you with this piece, which is there is broader data to suggest globally MMA might be on the decline. It's not exactly clear, but in the 3 major markets, Russia, Brazil, and the United States, events are going down year over year and have been for quite some time at this point. It got kind of propped up 2016 with like the Conor McGregor era. And so it's like the UFC just signed a $7.7 billion deal, 1.1 billion, which is well above expectations. And it's like, okay, so you're good for 7 years. What happens after that? What happens after that? I don't know the answer, but I think we're going to find out. And to your point, if you have made this pivot in such a way where you're like, it's us now, we have to take care of this now, I don't know what happens long term.
You mentioned not knowing what the future holds. So I'll be remiss not asking you about the immediate future, about how you feel as somebody that creates content that is, progressive, about where we sit right now on a day that, Pam Bondi's making threats about hate speech. What's your level of concern?
I just don't see how this doesn't. I'm just going to be real with you. Okay. I don't see how this doesn't turn bad. I just don't see how this doesn't get ugly. I don't know exactly how that will look, and I have no timeline. These are events that are beyond my capacity to properly order. But we're not even a year into this, and the damage that they've done. I mean, even if the administration had, they can only serve for however long they've been in office. What is it, 9 months, give or take, whatever it is at this point? That after that, they'd have to leave office. Even if they left office tomorrow, there is extensive damage already, to say nothing of what's going to be there after 4 years. Hello, Trump already tried to steal the election in 2020. What makes anybody think that you're going to have free and fair elections in 2028, to say nothing of 2026? They're already talking about the Democratic Party being terrorists. They're already Now, Pam Bondi did walk it back from hate speech to hate speech that incites violence, which is a pretty actually significant walk back. But nevertheless, there's all of this agitation. Fundamentally, this is a lesson I've learned. Fundamentally, there are huge portions of the right that do not believe in the left's right to govern. Period. That's why they tried to steal the election in 2020. They clearly don't respect the electorate, and then all the diverse groups that come from it. Hello, look what they're doing to attack every part of that in every possible way that they can. But more to the point, that's what January 6th was about. When the North Carolina governor, the Democratic one, comes in, what did the legislature do? They stripped out a bunch of his powers and all the way down his administration to make it hard for them. Look at what they're trying to do with gerrymandering. Look at what they're trying to do with largely minority blue cities, DC, where we call home, and Chicago and LA, and yes, they might go into Memphis. I'll see what that looks like, but that's also a place that's not asking for it. And hello, Memphis also has a pretty interesting demographic makeup. So the point I'm trying to make is these are not people that believe that they have to share power with us. It's gonna get bad. I did an interview with Abdul El Sayed, who is running for Senate in Michigan. He's Bernie Sanders endorsed. He's like the guy when it comes to Medicare for all. Great guy, great candidate. Hope he wins. But I interviewed him and I asked him a very basic question. I'm not asking you to commit crimes. Nobody is asking anybody to break the law at all in any capacity whatsoever. But in the interest of protecting a constitutional order, are you willing to be jailed? Because I'm sorry, if you're a Democratic primary candidate and you can't give a straight answer to that question, get to stepping. I have no interest. I'm not voting for anybody willing to lay down, because even if we elect nothing but, hard-nosed fighters, basically, whatever you want to call that, guys who show, pushback, even then we're on thin ice. Anything less than that, and I don't know what to tell you, it's going to get bad. My view is deeply negative, no question about it.